Today, I'm going to take top sci-fi fantasy series and give a recommendation for a non-English language film for you to watch. My rationale here is, honestly, the vast majority of my viewership, at least, is English speaking, and you tend to watch films, if you speak English as a first language, primarily in English. And I think when you do that, you miss out on a lot of great world cinema and cinema that is done outside of your normal language. And so I wanted to use this opportunity in this video to maybe encourage you to see movies that you haven't seen. I mean, this is a pretty boring video if I recommend for those who like reading Lord of the Rings to go watch Lord of the Rings, or even like 300 or Spartacus or something. English watchers and readers probably have already gotten there, but I want to try to cross over here internationally. Now, also, I am a native English speaker, which means I have not seen as much international cinema as I should, so this is not going to be a complete list, but I do think we have 10 great movies that I can recommend for you from top fantasy sci-fi series. Now, instead of like picking my top 10 favorite fantasy genre and movies, I just went with sort of standard, which I think the best list of a lot of thoughts throughout the fantasy genre is from the r/Reddit fantasy top novels. And they did one this year in 2025. And so I just took the top 10 from that list, imported into a Word document, and thought a long time about recommendations for those movies. Before we get specifically into the recommendations, I want to be clear that my recommendations here are not going to be one-to-one story elements or like visual echoes of particular fantasy stories. I actually think those recommendations are not as interesting. If I just recommended every foreign film that has a sword in it with, fantasy books that primarily has swords or like wizards, like that's not interesting. More important to stories, I think, are the themes involved and the way they make you feel. And so I try to use those elements in guiding my recommendations, not just, one-to-one story elements. The closest I get is the one I do for Misborn, but we'll get there in a second. So let's start with number 10, Jade Legacy, or I guess the Greenbone Saga, as it's called. I always just call it the Jade books. But these are by Fonda Lee. I have read these. They're fantastic. They are a great fantasy sort of like hybrid novel, because it's in the modern day, but still certainly some fantastical elements with the Jade magic. But primarily this is kind of a mafia, organized crime, family drama with a lot of fantasy elements. And that gives a whole lot of options in the international film scene. But honestly, as I kept thinking about what is the core of the Greenbone Saga, it is the expectations of community, the expectations of culture, and the pulls of family and what loyalty means. And I couldn't think of a better international film than Akira Kurosawa's High and Low. This came out in 1963 and is a modern film set in modern Japan, post-World War II Japan. I think a lot of people think of Kurosawa, they think of like samurai epics, because he did a lot of great ones, Hidden Fortress, Seven Samurai, etc. But he also made a lot of great modern films and dramas, and High and Low is, in my opinion, his best of that kind of genre of film that he made. The basic synopsis of High and Low is that there's a very wealthy businessman, and it just starts off at a day in his house. He has a son that he loves very much, and that son is playing with the housekeeper's son, who's also there cleaning the house. And there's some drama over the business, and you kind of follow this, and you think it's going to be sort of a corporate thriller. And then one of the boys is kidnapped by a kidnapper who is asking for a huge ransom that obviously only someone like this rich man could pay. Because when he hears about this, the man's like, I'll pay anything, I'll do anything. And then he finds out that the abductor accidentally took not the son of the rich man, who's fine, but the son of the housekeeper. This ransom. So it is a drama about this businessman's expectations, class difference, what it means to be a family and protect those around you. It is brilliant. It is tense, because in the midst of this drama about if they're going to pay or not pay the ransom, you're also following the police trying to find the kidnapped child and the actual kidnapper themselves, with the beautiful cinematography of Kurosawa, where just every shot is gorgeously done. Will keep you on the edge of your seat. And actually, this is a timely moment to watch this film, because there's going to be a English language film remake of this by Spike Lee, Highest to Lowest, coming out later this year. So it's a perfect time to watch it. Check out High and Low. It is phenomenal, makes you think, and has one of the best final shots in a movie, full stop, period. So number 9 on the Reddit top fantasy novels of all time is the Misborn series by Brandon Sanderson. This is actually my favorite Sanderson, so I'm glad this is in the top 10 there. And to be quite honest, it was difficult to think of a film for this book series, because this book series is quite wide-ranging. It is post-apocalyptic. There's sort of a love story. There is obviously fantastical elements. I think this is where sort of the hard magic system really started to take hold of the fantasy genre, with the metal magic in that book. Ultimately, what I kept coming back to about this book is that it is epic. The action, the court politics, even the romance is all sort of at this large, world-changing lens. And so I wanted to think of, like, what is a great, epic foreign language film? And I kept coming back to one of my favorites, which is Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, directed by Ang Lee. This film came out in the year 2000 and is known to a lot of, probably one of the most known on this list, a lot of English language speakers, because Ang Lee directed a lot of great English language films, as most especially Brokeback Mountain. It was nominated for a lot of Oscars. It has big names. You may have seen this, but I do think if you haven't seen it, it's now 25 years old. Absolutely check it out if you're a Misborn fan. As I said, there's one plot-to-plot element in this list that is certainly part of this recommendation, and that is in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Even if you haven't seen it, you've probably seen clips. They literally like fly between buildings. Like gravity is more like a suggestion for like the kung fu heroes, and many of the scenes have very similar visual cues and language as, at least in my head, what like a Kelsier fight would look like. You should check it out. You love Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. It's a basic story where there is this thing, I think it's actually called the Sword of Destiny, but like this important sword that is stolen from a kung fu master, and then 2 other kung fu masters are trying to figure out what is going on and keep that from falling into the wrong hands, which might change this empire's wide power dynamics in the empire in China at that time. I won't say more, except there's like great romance. There is great action. It was edge of your seat. It is one of the most watchable movies ever made. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Check it out. So number 8 on the r/Reddit fantasy top 10 is Discworld, which is a series that I just started this year. I've really enjoyed. I've read 3 books in the Death arc and have mostly enjoyed them, and certainly have laughed out loud, probably more than any other time I've read a novel. And so this was a particular challenge, because comedy is difficult in foreign cultures, because so much of comedy is culturally reliant, and even language reliant on things like double entendre, turns of phrase that only mean things in certain parts of the world. So this was a difficult thing to explore, but I kept coming back to one of my favorite comedies of all time by one of my favorite directors, and that is Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown by Pedro Almodovar. Pedro Almodovar has made several incredible films: Pain and Glory, Parallel Mothers, Voltaire, All About My Mother. I mean, there's some incredible movies. The Skin I Live In. He's a great director, and his worlds are just so chaotic in the best possible way, and Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown is in that same vein, but is all turned towards absurd and comedy. The story isn't really important. Basically, Antonio Banderas, a very young Antonio Banderas, has a lover who starts getting suspicious of him, and so follows him into this really weird world that he inhabits. Not like Another World, just like all of these weird, odd characters happening back and forth, and they keep coming in and out of the movie with comical things. I mean, everything from like sleeping pills being consumed accidentally and someone falls asleep in an inopportune moment, to like guns being in the wrong places and crimes and misunderstandings. And it is hilarious, and it is like one of the best. I always tell people when I talk about this movie, like, if you want to know about Chekhov's guns principle, you know, the idea that Anton Chekhov reportedly had is just like, if you introduce something, you have to use it. Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown by Pedro Almodovar. And hopefully that gives you a taste for Almodovar, and you should really watch a lot of his films. Number 7 on the fantasy top 10 is The Wheel of Time, a huge, expansive series that covers an entire continent's worth of cultures and power dynamics and power struggles and armies against one another and different ideologies clashing, even at the outset of like greater evils. It's a very difficult work to think of a single recommendation for because it encompasses so much, but the movie I came up with is The Battle for Algiers by Guillaume Pontecorvo. I think I said that right. I've actually never said that name out loud before making this video. Battle for Algiers rightly is considered a masterpiece of pseudo-documentary filmmaking. It is about the titular battle for Algiers and larger struggle for independence of the nation of Algeria against incredibly livid in the worst possible way. The sounds of this struggle are so precise in this film. I mean, I still can recall very clearly how loud the marching of officers into Algiers is in this film. I own this film. I think it's quite amazing and is a great recommendation off of Wheel of Time because so much of Wheel of Time is about insurgency or power and the interplay thereof. This is absolutely an anti-colonial film, and it's about the very, very complicated morality involved in those things, and also the true evils of colonialism. And so much of Wheel of Time also deals with these themes of colonialism and taking over people's culture and the evils therein and how to fight back against that. It's so good, and it is also truly mind-blowing. This is one of my most recommended films that whenever I'm talking to people. Battle for Algiers, please check it out, especially if you like Wheel of Time. The 6th best fantasy of all time, according to r/Reddit, because for me this would be the number 1, that is Malazan, Book of the Fallen, an absolutely incredible work. And a couple things always stand out when I talk about Malazan in comparison to other works, and I had to take that into account when I was recommending this movie. One, of course, epic. Some of the biggest possible things happen around gods, around ascendants, around armies, while also at the same time, some of the most grounded drama that's ever portrayed in a book, from like the squad level in armies during these larger than life fights, how they fight against it, how they exist here, while also having thematic strength that is truly astounding to me, particularly around a lot of existential areas like death, compassion, redemption, friendship, and truly, it sounds trite to say it, but like the meaning of life and how meaning is so important to existence and how that waxes and wanes based on the experience and where an individual is in the moment of their lives. Malazan is just brilliant, which is why it's a well I'm going to go to until I die and go on into the great unknown, which is a good segue to the film that I'm going to recommend, which is Ingmar Bergman's masterpiece, The Seventh Seal. Swedish language film, came out in 1957. I think actually for Malazan fans out there, let me just read you the run-up, kind of the first couple scenes in this movie, and I think it will help you understand why I recommended it to you. Set in Sweden during the Black Death, it tells the journey of a medieval knight, played by Max von Sydow, and a game of chess he plays with the personification of death, who has come to take his life. That starts off the drama, and then honestly, this is just an incredible reflection of death and living in the light of that death and human experiences in light of the absurd and sometimes cruelly absurd. It's beautiful, black and white. The filmmaking is tremendous. It's one of those films that will have you thinking about it for the rest of your life after you watch it, just like I think happens to me when I read Malazan. I'll be thinking about it the rest of my life. I honestly, this is one of the easiest ones when I was going over this list. Like, immediately I made this connection and immediately needs to be done. I mean, honestly, even like the characters themselves, in some ways, Max von Sydow's character could be like a Captain Perrin, and Death obviously could be Hood. I mean, there's like very easy one-to-one, like even character beats in these books. Please go see The Seventh Seal. element for recommending it, but I think broadly, especially in the character of Fitz, Robin Hobb is telling the story of people living in extraordinary times and trying to do the best in the moment where they are called to make terrible, difficult, confusing choices, living on the edges of world events while also being a real person with real feelings, real friendships, real heartbreaks, and just like a tremendous overarching story through the life of a whole person. And while I was meditating on that, I immediately thought of my favorite Hayao Miyazaki film, which is The Wind Rises, 2014 film. The main character, Hiro, starts off as a boy and eventually becomes a man who loves airplanes. He loves the science of air and travel and everything around it, and that's all he has ever wanted to do is build planes. But building up in Imperial Japan in the early 20th century, he is eventually working for planes reality of that so often our dreams are imperfect and that we can never make them perfect, but in many ways they are worth achieving or trying to achieve, and sometimes because of the human scenario around it, it's worth not achieving those dreams. It is an incredible. I still remember when I saw this movie for the first time. I literally watched it on an airplane. I'm sorry, director Miyazaki, that I watched it on my phone the first time, but I was on a plane. I didn't really know much about it, just turned on, and I was weeping in my seat for one particular moment that is quite wonderful and really audacious, and because of the slow storytelling of the film really works. It is an anime film, which if you're not a fan of anime, I completely get it. I'm actually not a huge fan generally of animated films. I like good ones, but I don't seek them out, and I still found this one of the most profound works of art I've seen in my life, and has the same sort of heart that A Realm of the Elderlings has, both in devastating and joyful ways. Cannot recommend strongly enough The Wind Rises by Hayao Miyazaki. Number 4 is the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I've talked a lot about these books and sort of my like-hate relationship with them. I really liked the first couple of books, and then I've really fallen off and I've DNF'd the series and don't intend to go back as I'm taping this right now. So the hardest part about this is that this is probably my least favorite book on this top 10 fantasy. It's hard to recommend things for movies you don't like without being snippy, but I won't be, because Brandon Sanderson's Stormlight Archive does have a lot of strengths, particularly just like this wonderful sense of action, sense of cool, and also makes you really, really care for your main characters, kind of the three main perspectives that you have, incredibly deeply, very quickly, and really feel the need to see where this story goes. It's awesome. You know what I mean? Like the moments of everything from, is it Bridge 9, Bridge 4? Whatever the bridge team is, like these action moments, the fight on the shattered plains. I won't say too much more, but there's like so many moments in these books that are just like, wow. And so as I was struggling to find a recommendation, immediately upon thinking of this film, I was like, that's the one. And that is RRR, the 2023 Indian film that is about sort of the anti-colonial. I just realized I have multiple anti-colonial movies on here, but that's some of the best world cinema out there because of unfortunate historical realities. But it's about starting to unify India against England, kind of. I mean, this really takes a lot of liberty with the history of India, and is actually, there's a lot of really interesting reading to do on the actual portrayal of the two heroes in this movie, because it is somewhat wrapped up in sort of a growing Indian nationalism that currently is happening in India. I am not able to speak about that authoritatively, so I would recommend that you look up articles on that. But the film itself is about a boy who is stolen from his village and a hero who is sent to retrieve that boy from the British. And this has some of the best action scenes you will ever see in a movie, and many of them you'll just say they're so audacious, you're like, that is nuts. And yet you're going to love every second of it. You will stand up and cheer. It is like, if you have ever liked like a Taken or a John Wick, RRR is this, but at a much more epic scale with much more at stake. At least it feels like there's much more at stake. Epic is the word again and again that you have to come back to when you think of RRR. It's also very long. It's over 3 hours long, which Stormlight Archive fans should be fine with because those books are way long. And I think it's on Netflix still right now, so you can pretty easily check it out. Strongly, strongly recommend. I've seen it, I think 3 times, and I saw it twice like within a week because I saw it once and I was like, oh my gosh. And then I went to people and were like, you got to watch this. Let's sit down. We're going to have a movie night and watch it again. It's that good. Some of the best action you'll see in a movie. I think Stormlight Archive fans particularly will really, really enjoy this. The third top fantasy is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. Absolutely fantastic tale. I don't have to talk about A Song of Ice and Fire because so many people know about it. No, it's great. If you haven't read it, it lives up to the hype. Absolutely. You should absolutely read it, even if Martin is not going to finish it, which he might. And even if you watch the TV show, there's so much in there that is so worth reading. It's great. Martin's work weaves together so many things. It is a critique, I think, of ruling classes in the Middle Ages, sort of this tendency in fantasy where we just focus on the knights and the kings and the emperors and forget about the common people. I think there's a clear emphasis in Martin's work about making sure that you don't forget about the deaths of the common foot soldier or the peasant and the trials thereof. A lot to say about power, a lot to say about sex and how that's used in power, and also just like in a sexy way to make a story really, really good. All of this combined to me thinking of potentially the best erotic thriller, my favorite erotic thriller, I think probably for sure, and that is The Handmaiden, directed by Park Chan-wook in 2016, I believe. This movie takes place in Korea, but Japan occupied Korea. And again, a very interesting discussion on colonialism because one of our main characters is a Korean national who's trying to be recognized by sort of the Japanese aristocracy as someone important. And there's a lot of interesting things to say about that, except that this guy in many ways is a pseudo-villain, or at least unlikable to the people who are watching, the viewer. And our main point of view is a handmaiden who's brought into this house as there is a plot to basically steal an inheritance from another young woman. And I honestly don't want to say much more than that because if you haven't seen this film, so much of what I even just said is maybe not 100% accurate based on what you're watching and how things change. And it's just one of the best plots and scripts I can remember watching. So many, just fascinating twists and turns that are wonderful. An incredible heart in the midst of it with one particular relationship and wanting to be free of that relationship. There's like twists that Christopher Nolan is probably jealous of. I mean, it's so good. And as I said, it is an erotic thriller. There's a lot of sex and sexual themes that are part of the story of this work in the same way that in Song of Ice and Fire, I think sex is intricately tied with what happens in that world as it is in our real world, which is, I think, why that's important. Handmaiden is great. It's actually my favorite Park Chan-wook. A lot of people like another film, or their favorite of his, Old Boy, which is a great movie in many ways. I like The Handmaiden a bit more, just because of the epic nature of it. It's fantastic. Definitely check out The Handmaiden, especially if you like A Song of Ice and Fire. Undoubtedly, inarguably is great at is having a distinct voice, having characters that are defined, and those characters that are defined are almost always morally complicated, might even be a compliment to them. Most of them are morally compromised. They do bad things, or they have done bad things, or their view of the world is so skewed that characters, even our heroes, are morally bankrupt, but we in some ways connect with them, is Memories of Murder by Bong Joon-ho. Bong Joon-ho, most people know from Parasite. It's a fantastic movie, in my opinion, the best film of the 21st century. This is one of his earlier works about the first serial killer in South Korea, at least sort of modern serial killer, and the policemen who try to solve this murder. Your main characters are, the police officers are quite terrible people in many ways, but that you generally kind of like is a strong word, but like sympathize, and they're following a much greater evil, which is this serial killer who's murdering women and girls in this sort of suburban village town in South Korea. I should have said this with Park Chan-wook. I hope like it awakens you to their whole filmography, because it's one of the best filmographies out there. If you just go through, obviously, like I said, Parasite is great, but like Okja, Snowpiercer, The Host, Mother. I mean, so many great movies that he has made. But especially if you're a First Law fan, you need to see Memories of Murder. We are now at number 1, which is, as it should be if it's not going to be Malazan, The Lord of the Rings and the larger Lord of the Rings universe. It is so difficult to find a movie parallel to this because the scope is huge, and it is really totemic in storytelling in fantasy in a way that is very difficult in any other medium to find and define. But there is one film that is quite totemic to modern filmmaking, was revolutionary, as Lord of the Rings was revolutionary, maybe not created a genre, but defined a genre that has existed even to our current day. And that is another Akira Kurosawa film, the classic Seven Samurai. If you haven't seen this, especially because it's black and white, it's about 4 hours long, it is sort of a commitment, and I think people struggle, and so they don't enter into it. Seven Samurai is a beautiful movie that is, just like Lord of the Rings, takes its time to set up its stake. The first hour, I think, you don't even get to the village where the main tension and battle eventually takes place, because you are slowly meeting all of the Seven Samurai, their lives, where they were, what brought them to what they're ultimately going to do for this village. If you don't know, the overarching story of Seven Samurai is there is this small village in feudal Japan that is being preyed on by raiders constantly, and they think they are going to die pretty soon because these raiders are just going to come in and destroy the whole village, especially at the harvest. And so they're desperate and try to find these roaming warriors called samurai to come and defend them. But this is a poor village, and so they have to find, I think, desperate samurai is the word that is used. And so they find these seven samurai who all come to this moment for various reasons, whether it's dishonor in their past, whether because they're drunkards, whether because they have like a struggling with PTSD. There's a lot of different reasons that draws these seven men that eventually have to defend this village against these raiders. And it is tremendous. It is epic in scope. The battles in this are going to blow your mind, just like the battles in Lord of the Rings do. The storytelling is crisp, and the cast is huge in the same way that Lord of the Rings has this massive, expanding cast. And the filmmaking techniques and how Seven Samurai is shot by Kurosawa endure to this day. Everything from how he uses motion on the screen to his use of forced perspective. I mean, there's so many things that Kurosawa does that endures to this day, but like you as a modern viewer will not feel out of place watching this film from the 1950s, and even action movies today try to emulate how great that film looks. It's, again, I use this word, but I'll use it again, totemic for film, just like Lord of the Rings is totemic for fantasy novels. You need to watch Seven Samurai by Akira Kurosawa. What do you think of my list of non-English language films to recommend for the top fantasy novels? Let me know. First, have you seen those movies that I recommended? What you think of them? And two, maybe some other recommendations you would have based on fantasy novels, whether these top 10 or others. Would love to hear them. Thanks for watching. As always, first in, last out.